Welcome to the Week 14 edition of the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson as we talk about Week 14 matchups. How you doing, Carson?
I'm doing very well, and kind of clinched my spot in the playoffs in my main league. Blake's hoping to do the same this week, and maybe both the Fantasy Football Brothers can be in the playoffs. That would be the dream, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it just?
Well, it's a pretty regular fixture
in
our playoffs, but hey, I mean, that's why you listen, right?
Exactly. Some might say we know what we're talking about. All right, we can move on to the buys. We got the Colts, Dolphins, your Patriots, and the Eagles.
Let's go, baby.
Yes.
Number one seed.
So the Colts, you're missing Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman. I think those are definitely the biggest. Dolphins.
Yeah, maybe Carson Wentz.
Okay, sure. He has kind of emerged as a viable replacement option, and he's had some great weeks in there. I don't know what his form has been like lately. I know that he's kind of regressed a bit, but he has been worth rostering, let's just say. So yeah, I did think about saying it, but sure, we can include him. Dolphins, do you feel like including Tua in that same designation, or is he not at that level?
Yes, kind of, a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe in a deeper league.
Yeah, Myles Gaskin, Jalen Waddle, who's been playing.
Yeah, definitely Waddle.
Waddle has done amazing. Gesicki and Devontae Parker's back. Patriots. We'll talk about the Patriots, I bet, whenever we talk about the Bills a bit later. But we got, Mac Jones, Mr. 2 for 3. Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson. I guess keep an eye on Harris's injury. It allowed Stevenson to have a lot of carries that day and the game script. Jacoby Myers, Kendrick Bourne, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith. I mean, they got a assortment of people that are worth rostering, but not like huge fantasy names per se.
Yeah, it's more about the sum of the parts than the whole.
Exactly. Eagles, Jalen Hurts. He didn't play last week, but you're missing him still. This entire backfield, whoever's the most healthy, I guess you're missing. I mean, Gainwell and Sanders both had great games, but I think Gainwell picked up an injury, so keep an eye on that. And then Boston Scott and Jordan Howard still exist, so that's kind of a mess. Devontae Smith.
How about Dallas Goedert?
Dallas Goedert, yeah, he did amazing. I can't believe it. Our dad, in one of his other leagues where they have to play tight ends, he played Kittle, because, why wouldn't you, with how he's been doing lately. Kittle played later in the day, so when he saw Goddard score, he thought he messed up, but Kittle ended up doing even better. So
he rosters both Goddard and Kittle, and he's kind of been bouncing back and forth, especially when Kittle was struggling early on.
Yeah, could have been the top 2 tight end finishes last week. I probably was.
Oh, I think most definitely.
What a play!
All right, let's jump into
What a play! I was just gonna say that Kittle touchdown. I'm still thinking about him keeping his feet in bounds. That was so incredible.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Thursday night football. Steelers Vikings. We'll start with Najee Harris. Hasn't done amazing lately, but I say that. It's a very high bar. He hasn't had 20-plus fantasy points since Week 8, but he's still an undisputed RB1, and this Minnesota defense is a good matchup. They're ranked 29th in rushing yardage, allowed a game at 131.5, so I expect him to potentially have a big game. Deontay Johnson, favorite player in all of fantasy. Going into halftime, he was really mediocre. Like, he was low single digits, and then he boomed 30.5 fantasy points. And I'll kind of just get into exactly how impressive it was that Johnson did that well, because Big Ben only completed 21 passes, and Johnson had 8 receptions, 2 touchdowns. He dropped a touchdown pass too, so he had a good day. But it hurts players like Claypool when Johnson takes up that much of the target share. It hurts Claypool. Claypool had 3 targets, 2 receptions for 52 yards, 1 rush for 2 yards, 7.4 fantasy points. I think he's still questionable, so monitor his injury status. I don't know, maybe that's been alleviated at the games tomorrow as we're recording this. He's averaging 10.08 fantasy points in the last 5 games, which might be surprising because he's a pretty big-name player. So I'll ask you, Blake, can Claypool be trusted in this favorable matchup against the Vikings?
I'd like to say yes, but I don't think so, really. I mean, I think you can flex him if you need to, but I don't think you feel great about it. He just hasn't really been very special this year.
You were hoping for a low end wide receiver 2, and he's definitely not that, I wouldn't say. Yeah, he's flex worthy right now. Big Ben's been struggling. Announced he's most likely leaving the team, which probably means retirement. I can't imagine that doesn't mean retirement. But Deontay is getting what he needs, and it's not leaving much for anyone else. Pratt Freiermuth, though, 6 double-digit fantasy finishes this season, but only one of those was without a touchdown, so he is kind of a touchdown-dependent tight end, which I hate to see. He had 3 receptions for 26 yards.
That's pretty much all tight ends.
Exactly, except for the very top, and we go on this rant every time, so I'm not really going to get onto that. And I love watching the highlights and hearing them go, Muth! It's so powerful, it's so awesome every time he gets the ball, but it only happened 3 times last week. But I'll ask you, kind of the same question of Claypool, and it might be a similar answer. Are you more confident starting Muth against the Vikings secondary?
I do kind of like Freiermuth more. I mean, well, and you have to keep in mind that he is a tight end, so I think the ceiling, or I guess the expectations, are going to be lowered automatically. But I feel like he has better touchdown upside than Claypool. I mean, I would be really surprised if he didn't have more touchdowns than Claypool at this point in the season.
Yeah, I feel like he does.
Yeah, so I mean, you feel better about him, and there's kind of streaming potential at tight end if he's not rostered in your league yet. With Gesicki and Hunter Henry and Goddard being out this week. I mean, no one's really starting Jack Doyle, but there are some tight ends that are regular fixtures, and they're not here this week. So there may be an opportunity for Freiermuth to show up for you.
Yeah, and as I said before, this Vikings defense is weak, ranking 30th in total yards allowed per game and 28th in NFL points allowed per game. They allowed the Lions to have their first win in Week 13, so we might celebrate that later for the Lions, but that shows you that this Vikings defense definitely is not anything to worry about. This Vikings offense, though, does have quite a few fantasy-relevant options. Kirk Cousins, 30 for 40, 340 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a fumble, good for 20.2 fantasy points in a loss, so I don't really think this Vikings offense is the worry. Blake just traded him away because he is Brady. But he's position ranked 6th in 6-point passing TDs. I wasn't able to do the conversion to 4-point, but I guess I'll ask you, what QBs are you regularly starting over Cousins? Because I guess the list is much shorter than you'd probably think.
Yeah, I mean, Brady and... sorry, I didn't mean to draw a blank after Brady, but...
I would say Kyler.
Yeah, well, yeah. In a 6-point, I would kind of maybe not, but if he continues to run the way he did last week, then yeah, totally.
Cousins has been safer than Mahomes.
Josh Allen, yeah, Mahomes is kind of falling outside. He's still a top 10 quarterback, but I think he's kind of and I think he's on that lower end of 7 through 10 maybe.
It's just the fact that we're having this conversation with Kirk Cousins shows you how he's had such a surprisingly great fantasy season.
Yeah, it's certainly something to behold.
Yeah, Alexander Mattison, as said before, second coming of Dalvin Cook. Monitor Dalvin Cook's injury status. I think he's officially questionable with a shoulder. It doesn't seem very likely for him to play, but keep an eye on that. Pittsburgh's defense ranks 27th rushing yards allowed per game. So I expect Madison to have another Cook-like performance if Cook is out. Justin Jefferson did his thing, 35.6 fantasy points. He's amazing,
very much so,
phenomenal.
Yeah,
I think wide receiver 2 in position ranking, so that's incredible. Adam Thielen will be inactive Thursday night with his high ankle sprain. Isn't that what it is?
Correct.
But doesn't require surgery. So is there a timetable on that?
Not necessarily. His season is not at risk of being ended just yet, but a high ankle sprain is difficult for players to get back quickly, so you may not see him for multiple weeks after this one as well.
Yeah, which allows the door to open for KJ Osborne, who took advantage of Thielen. I think Thielen literally had 1 catch, and he got injured.
He had 1 catch for 0 yards.
You kind of got an idea of what this offense, sort of looked like on the spur of the moment of what they're going to pivot to. KJ Osborne, 4 receptions, 47 yards and a touchdown. And then Tyler Conklin, 7 receptions, 56 yards. It felt like he was getting the ball all the time, and I think he had a touchdown that was ruled incomplete, but he almost had one. So I'll ask you, and obviously this will depend in leagues that you must start a tight end, but Does Osborne or Conklin, in your opinion, have more upside in Thielen's absence?
I think it's Osborne because we've seen Tyler Conklin. He's kind of had his role defined this season. Osborne had some good games at the beginning of the season, 14 and a half and 20 points in weeks 1 and 2. And when he gets a lot of targets, 6, 7 targets, which is what Thielen has been averaging. I mean, he tends to produce. So I like Osborne's upside in Thielen's absence more than Tyler Conklin.
I do agree. But in leagues that have a tight end and you're not really confident with your tight end too, I think Conklin is a good option to go after, and he's not a big name player, but he's having a good opportunity set up before him. We'll move on to the next game. Saints Jets, kind of a shorter list as far as fantasy relevant players. I mean, you got Taysom Hill, 19 for 41 through 4 picks. I think all after he injured his finger. And he'll be playing through that. So monitor that. I don't think it's really a concern.
He was a full participant at practice.
Yeah.
So nothing limiting him there.
Re-aggravating it is the only thing you need to look out for. But
sure.
Yeah, but I mean, his rushing floor, that being said, of those passing stats, he did have 2 passing touchdowns, but 20.66 fantasy points because 11 rushes on 101 rushing yards. He even hurdled a defender. He's like the weirdest player to watch in all of the NFL, just with his versatility. He's such a
it'll
gadget.
Be interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what New Orleans does in the offseason regarding quarterback because, I guess we can still see if Jameis Winston recovers in time for the beginning of next season, but unless he's a free agent, I don't know that off the top of my head. Either way, I don't know what they're going to do with Taysom Hill. He's been paid, like he's on the he's on the roster, he's on the salary, so it'll just be interesting if maybe he develops as a better passer, kind of like Lamar Jackson after his struggles initially from quarterback, but. I mean, who knows? He's certainly fun to watch. I'll give him that.
Yeah. Do you think his rushing floor gives him, plenty of fantasy relevance?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like he's gonna be involved in quarterback powers and designed runs. So it's gonna be that'll keep his floor relatively high. I mean, that's a valuable thing from the quarterback is when they use their legs a lot.
Yeah. All right, Mark Ingram tested positive for COVID today, and really didn't make use of last Thursday's matchup against the Cowboys. He had 2 great games before that, but didn't do amazing there. But Alvin Kamara, full participant in practice on Wednesday, hasn't played since week 9, so this will be his first week back. Everything's pointing towards him playing this week, so that'll be big for people that have Kamara because he's definitely, high-end RB1, and this Jets defense ranks last in total yardage allowed per game and last in NFL points allowed per game. So definitely a good matchup for, I guess, Hill and Kamara. I mean, those are really the only people you're thinking about, not little Jordan Humphrey.
Your concern is one vulturing from the other, but against the Jets, you expect a lot of points to be scored. So maybe enough to go around for those guys.
Yeah, and I think they're able to coexist because Kamara's versatility as a receiving back too. It gives him that versatility that Taysom has as a quarterback. So I think it allows them to coexist nicely. I'm not really worried about that per se. We can talk about Elijah Moore for the Jets. He had 6 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown and 1 rush for 9 yards, good for 20.6 fantasy points. In weeks 7 through 13, Moore's only single-digit fantasy performance was week 12, Zach Wilson's first game back. Corey Davis suffered a season-ending core muscle injury, so, opens the target share even more for Elijah Moore. I think he's something ridiculous. Since, week 7, he's for sure a top 20 wide receiver, but he's, a really high rank in this stretch. So that's definitely interesting. I'll ask you, does Corey Davis's season-ending injury keep Moore consistent, even in the return of Zach Wilson?
This is another one of those. This is another one of those situations where I'd like to say yes, but probably not.
Yeah. We only have 2 games.
This was the first game where Zach Wilson looked half decent. I mean, This is the third time in his career where he's thrown a touchdown. So, so that's kind of alarming. That definitely is going to lower upside for all of his receivers. I mean, the Saints defense has been like kind of unimpressive lately, so maybe he can do it again. And moving forward, I just had him pulled up. Let me look at the rest of their schedule. So Miami, that's going to be tough. I think he's going to really struggle in that game. Zach Wilson, that is. Jacksonville, that's a good one. Tampa Bay, that one could go either way. And then Buffalo in Week 18, you don't like that. So
Yeah.
it's not looking the best path for success consistently from these guys. But maybe here and there you may have to play the matchup.
Yeah, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'll just ask you point blank. Do you think Jamison Crowder is worth rostering? We talked about this a bit, so I kind of know your outlook, but
Yeah, my thing is that I really don't trust wide receivers that, game to game, you don't know what they're going to do.
yeah.
And that makes sense, right? Like we saw 2 weeks ago, Jamison Crowder got one catch. And
Yeah.
if you're going to be a main feature in an offense, I think week to week you're going to get involved. And when you only get one catch, that's somebody that you can, the eye test tells you that that guy's not as important to this offense as as you need him to be.
Yeah, I mean, with what Elijah Moore has done and the fact that we're still nervous about him just shows you how unpredictable this offense can be with Zach Wilson at quarterback. But like Blake said, Saints defense ranks 5th in rushing yards allowed per game, but 22nd in passing yards allowed per game. So maybe Moore could get a share and Crowder could get involved too. Maybe it could be good for them. You never know. We'll move on to Falcons-Panthers divisional matchup. Cordell Patterson, he had 12.6 fantasy points. You're not worried about him. Mike Davis stole a rushing touchdown. That was like their only touchdown the entire game.
It was a long run, too. It was like a 16 or 20-plus yard, one of the two.
It was. So, yeah, you're not worried about Patterson. Russell Gage, though. Let's talk about him a bit. 11 receptions for 130 receiving yards and a fumble. Good for 22 fantasy points. Can Gage be trusted?
No.
Okay. I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't see that line ever happening again, but
that should have been Kyle Pitts' stat line. The
Yep.
fact that they're not using Kyle Pitts as their main receiving bat or receiver in this offense is just it's baffling week after week. Russell Gage several weeks ago had 0 catches and 0 targets, and he started that game. So no, you can't trust him. This is like a fluke. This is like when Nyheim Hines breaks off for 25, 30 plus fantasy points. You can't count on that coming up week after week. So no, I don't trust Gage.
Yeah,
and maybe I'm crazy, but I don't think so. I think that I think it's just fluke.
Pitts is averaging just under 7 fantasy points since week 8. What do you do if you roster Pitts, especially in a tight end league?
I think at this point you got to keep starting him. I don't think that there really aren't that many gems at tight end that are just sitting around. Players like Dawson Knox, Dalton Schultz, those guys have already been scooped up. Freiermuth, if you want to start him, I mean, I get it, but I think you have way more upside with Pitts. We've seen that earlier in the season, so I think you got to roll with the guy that has upside at tight end and just hope that Matt Ryan and the Falcons offense can figure it out.
Yeah, but these pass catchers might struggle as the Panthers defense ranks 2nd in total yards allowed per game and 6th in NFL points allowed per game. Much stronger pass defense than run defense, so I mean Patterson will be able to do it all, but you're not worried about him anyways. I think 12.6 is awful, but I still think that's a fluke. He's legit, and it's crazy how this offense is using him, but he's legit for fantasy. Panthers. Cam Newton is the projected starter, although I read that whoever their coach is, I forget his name, Matt Rule, I think?
Yeah, Matt Rule.
Yeah, he's leaving the door open for P.J. Walker to have some game time, so that's interesting. But Cam Newton is the projected starter. Yes,
you saw what Cam did last time.
Talked about it a little bit last week when we were talking about buys, but 5 for 20, not great. Christian McCaffrey's out for the season, leaving the door open for Chuba Hubbard. We've talked about this before, and you don't like the Panthers' schedule for running back, so how would you assess Hubbard rest of the season for how
it's really it's really difficult. We talked about it before. They play the Bucks twice, they play the Bills, they play the Saints. Those are all top 5 run defenses at least.
Yeah.
So this is the only week where you feel relatively good about starting Chuba Hubbard, and then I think he's going to be kind of a low end flex for the rest of the season.
Yeah. Pick him up, though, if he's on waivers.
Yeah, he should be rostered. I mean, he should be rostered in all leagues
McCaffrey
because
manager.
Christian McCaffrey was rostered in all leagues.
Yep, agreed. DJ Moore, I'm talking about week 12, when they last played because they were on bye. DJ Moore managed to catch 4 of the 10 completed passes, one of them for 64 yards. Robbie Anderson, I would say is worth rostering, but can't be trusted yet, just because it's so hard to say what Cam's going to do with this offense. If he has another abysmal passing day, then I think you can drop Anderson. No questions asked. But Atlanta defense ranks 25th in total yards allowed per game and 30th in NFL points allowed per game. So this could be a good game for these offensive weapons on the Panthers, and a good game for Newton to get back on track. Hopefully, I'm kind of hoping for a success. Yeah.
I'm gonna bring this up real quick just because I kind of disagree with you about Robbie Anderson. So this is his third quarterback of the season, and we've seen no sign that he's going to get it done. At what point are we going to realize that he's the common denominator and that he's the issue?
Fair enough. I mean, I won't die on that hill, so fair enough. Yeah, there's got to be people on your waivers more upside. I do agree with that. We can move on to Seahawks, Texans. Russell Wilson, 30 for 37, 231 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 1 interception, 3 rushes, 15 yards, good for 16.74 fantasy points. Russ has struggled since coming back from his finger injury, but I mean, you gotta like this matchup against the Texans. How confident are you in starting Russ?
You do. I think if you have him, maybe you have a better option. Although, we talked about it in our league. Carson Wentz was rostered with the same on the same team that had Russell Wilson, and so I would probably like Carson Wentz ahead of Wilson. Although, looking back when we were discussing that, it was like, are you crazy? It's Russell Wilson, but he hasn't been the same since he came back from his finger injury.
No.
And that being said, it's the Texans. If he can't get it done this week, it's officially time to panic because, honestly, if you can't get it done against the Texans, who are you going to get it done against?
Exactly.
So, this kind of goes for all of the Seahawks players to an extent, and I think if you have him and you don't feel confident in your backup, who's a backup who's a second player on your roster at quarterback that you would feel more comfortable realistically starting ahead of Wilson?
A second quarterback, realistically. You had Cousins as your second quarterback, so definitely him.
Sure.
I agree with Wentz. Let's see. I don't really have any on mine because my number 2 is Newton because I have Kyler, so that's not a good example. I would definitely start Taysom over him.
Yeah. The point is that I think there are players that have been recently acquired from waivers that you might feel better about Russell Wilson, but it's just a really good matchup, and I think if play the matchup, I guess, and in this case, I think Wilson has an edge above most quarterbacks, so I think you go with him.
Yeah. I'll briefly talk about the backfield. Alex Collins was injured, monitors injury status. The Texans rank last in rushing yards allowed per game at 144.2. That being said, I don't think you can really... Do you think you can confidently start Collins with this mess of a backfield?
Confident is a very strong word in
Flex.
This scenario. I think you can flex him. We do need to keep in mind that there are some fantasy-ish running backs that are relevant. Obviously you're not considering replacing Collins with replacing Jonathan Taylor with Alex Collins this week, but there are some guys missing that you may get a good outcome out of Collins just based on the matchup. You said it yourself; they rank last against the run.
Yeah. They played the Titans in Week 12, right? When they allowed Foreman and Hilliard to both have over 100 rushing yards. I think that was the Titans. I think that was them playing the
Texans. I think you're correct.
Yeah, so that shows you what can happen. DK Metcalf averaging 6.5 fantasy points since Russ's return. We already talked about this. I'll see if you agree. This is his last chance before you make him prove himself. As far as if you're starting him on your lineup.
Yeah, and it's a tough time of the season to have that kind of situation on your hands because we're heading into the fantasy playoffs if you play standard scheduling. Yeah. So, it's a concerning time to have to be without one of your top pass catchers.
Yeah, and Lockett has been more reliable in the past 4 weeks. I mean, still not the most consistent, but he had a good game here in week 13,
Yeah,
7 receptions.
I'm hoping that Lockett got his slump out of the way
Yeah.
when Geno was throwing the ball.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. And yeah, this Texans defense is very bad. So let's hope that these Seahawks players can turn it around. And for the Texans, like we always do, let's just talk about Brandon Cooks. 3 receptions for 38 yards and 1 rush for 16 yards. But do you think this matchup where the Seahawks rank last in passing yards allowed and 31st in total yards allowed just guarantees high volume for Cooks?
It seems like a very positive situation that he's found himself in. It's going to be Davis Mills at quarterback, more likely than not, and we've seen them have a connection earlier this season, so there is some familiarity there. I do like the matchup. I think he gets the majority of the targets, or not the majority, I should say, but a very large portion of the targets week after week. So, yeah, it's a good matchup. I think you feel fine starting him this week.
I do agree. We'll talk about Raiders-Chiefs divisional matchup. Derek Carr, he just doesn't have enough upside to be making your starting lineup. Like he had a decent amount of passing yards, 249, but 0 passing touchdowns. He just can't be trusted as far as someone that will have upside. So I'm never gonna. Now that I say this, he'll probably go off, but I'm never picking him as a DFS play again.
Yeah, reverse jinx him because he needs a game where he throws for more than 2 passing touchdowns.
All right, let's do it. Yeah, I'll reverse jinx him. Josh Jacobs, though, 13 rushes, 52 rushing yards, and a touchdown, and 9 receptions for 38 receiving yards, 24 fantasy points. Kenyon Drake is out for the season with a broken ankle. Drake averaged 5 carries, roughly, and 3 receptions in weeks 9 through 12. What does this do for Jacobs' volume in your eyes?
I think it's a slight uptick. Obviously, I mean, there's touches there that have to go somewhere, so there will be other players in contention for those kind of to pick up the slack. But I think it'll be more of a committee behind Jacobs rather than just Kenyon Drake.
Yeah.
But I think it helps Jacobs a little bit, and we saw what Javonte Williams did against the Chiefs. It makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, it's a big if because and it'll come up later in the show too when we talk about other teams. But as long as the Chiefs don't get ahead big early, it does open the door for Jacobs to have a good day.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Just quickly mention the other players. Hunter Renfrow, Mr. Reliable. In fantasy this season, I feel like he's the best wide receiver you probably picked up with waivers. He wasn't drafted in many leagues. Proven that once again with 19.2 fantasy points. Darren Waller, moderate injury status. He's got issues with his knee and his back. I mean, you're starting him if he's available at tight end. And, Kansas City ranks 26th in total yards against. So like Blake was saying, if the game script works out for you, this is definitely a defense that can be overtaken and get some good plays against. But we'll talk about the Chiefs. So, the way I want to do this is because Mahomes has been honestly garbage in the last 5 games he's played, excluding when they played the Raiders last in Week 10. Because when they played the Raiders last, he was 35 for 50 for 406 passing yards and 5 passing touchdowns. But the 5 games, like 2 on one side, 3 on the other, he's averaging just over 10. So you're not, I guess you're not benching Mahomes, especially with
improving
given what he did last time.
Yeah, given the matchup, I think you have to give him a shot, but you're certainly not thrilled with where you drafted him, with how he's performed this season.
Yeah.
It really, I mean, and this is the thing that we'll talk about, especially in the offseason heading into the draft, that you guys, please wait on quarterbacks because
Blake ended up with Brady and Kirk and was one of the last to take quarterbacks.
Right, and so I was the last team to take a quarterback with Brady, and that was in the 11th round, I want to say. But, and maybe that's not correct, but either way.
It's late, though.
Yeah, I want to look that up, but I'll say it at the end. Anyway, don't rush out to get these quarterbacks early rounds. You can get more valuable role players what's the phrase? Skill positions.
Yes.
You can get more valuable skill possessions earlier in the draft when other teams are taking quarterbacks, and later in the draft you will find good, serviceable quarterbacks. I drafted Brady 104th overall, which did mean he came in the 11th round for me.
Wow. Yeah, there's proof. There is proof. Let's talk about the backfield, because I kind of want your help on this. Because I have Williams. Clyde, CEH had 11.2 fantasy points. Williams had 11. The 2 games CEH has been back, CEH has had 12 carries and 14 carries, whereas Williams has had 5. A lot of Williams' points this past week came from a big reception, so that helped him get to double digits. The Raiders rank 26th in rushing yards allowed per game at 124.8, so there could be enough to go around. But can you confidently start CEH? And I'll just say, what should fantasy managers do with Williams? So I'll ask you about both for the backfield.
Okay, so for CEH, he's the only guy that wasn't a part of this starting lineup when they played the Raiders back in Week 10.
Yeah, because
so
wasn't that the game that Williams had 30 something, like just over 30, I think?
Yeah, he was like 9 for 9 on receptions for like 100 yards. He had
And
that big catch.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, if they find a way to include Williams in a similar role this week, or obviously you can't expect what he did back in Week 10 to reemerge. But here's what I'll say: I think you can start Williams in this matchup, at least flex him. I mean, it's not the most it's not the most upside play, but I think that he's going to get used. He's continued to produce numbers with CEH back. You feel okay about that. You like the matchup. And then for CEH, I think you know what to expect because he's kind of been the same guy when he's been healthy, like all season long. He hasn't ever really popped off for anything special, but he gets low teens or, amount of touches in a game, so you kind of know what to expect there.
I agree. I do agree. We talk about... We don't really need to spend much time. Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce both had disappointing games in Week 13, but I mean, you're starting both of them, so that's all there is to be said. And the Raiders rank 25th in NFL points allowed per game. I do think it's interesting, though. I mean, Kelce's had a few big games, but he's also been pretty disappointing. But that being said, he's still position ranked number 1.
He is, but he is a shell of his former self this season compared to previous seasons, even at the tight end position. So, I mean, you're still starting him. That's kind of the bottom line. But I mean, disappointing for where you probably drafted him.
Yep. Okay, we can move on to the quick rematch between the Ravens and Browns, who face each other in Week 12. So I'll pretty much just read Week 12 stats. Lamar Jackson threw 4 picks against them and rushed the ball 17 times. Good for 9.4 fantasy points. Lamar has only had 2 games this season with more than 1 passing touchdown, which is appalling to me. And he has only had 2 rushing touchdowns, so he's not really increasing his floor there. Obviously, he gets the yardage, but he did horrible, really, against the Browns last time. So can fantasy managers actually bench him this week?
I think it's important to note that performance came after he missed the previous week due to illness.
Yes.
And I think that plays a factor in his poor performance. 17 rushes in Week 12. I mean, think of the upside that brings with a player like Lamar Jackson.
It's true.
If he has low double-digit carries in this game, I think he's going to keep his floor high enough to where you can still start him and feel good about it. I think he has a better game, obviously, than 4 interceptions. That should be down. The yardage should be up. I just think that he's going to be feeling better this week than he was back in Week 12. So, like, health-wise. So, I think you should keep him in your lineups if you have him.
Yeah, I do agree. Devonta Freeman had a great game last week against the Steelers, but in Week 12 he didn't have that great of a game, only 7 fantasy points, only had 1 reception. He had 5 last week against the Steelers, and that was kind of pivotal for him having a high floor. But do you think Freeman can be trusted in this matchup?
I think a little bit less so than Lamar Jackson. Obviously, I feel better about Jackson than Freeman, but I will say this. I think Freeman gets more receptions in this game. I think that just came from Lamar struggling to move the football through the air.
Yeah.
I think that he will have a a better floor because of that receiving usage. But we do need to keep in mind that this Cleveland defense is still tough. I mean, it's a tough defense, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I think you should lower expectations for Freeman relative to how he performed last week, just based on the matchup. But expect a bit higher of a floor based on his receiving usage.
Agreed. I can talk about the pass catchers real quick. Marquise Brown in Week 12 had 8 receptions for 51 yards. Mark Andrews had 4 receptions for 65 yards and a touchdown. Bateman had 4 receptions on 4 targets in Week 12, but last week he had 0 receptions on 1 target. Now, I don't think you should drop him if you roster him, but I would not be starting him this week in this tougher matchup. See what he does. If he has another game like that, though...
he's a wait and see, because it's a tough time of year to be taking risks on players like that.
Yeah, for people that were showing that they had a good floor. For sure. And then, like Blake was alluding to, this Browns defense ranks 4th in total yards allowed per game at only 315.6. So they are a tough defense. But we'll talk about the Browns real quick. This is Week 12 stats because they were on bye last week. Their stats against the Ravens. Nick Chubb had 5.9 fantasy points. Kareem Hunt had 2. Monitor his injury status because I guess the calf is still bothering him. Jarvis Landry, though, had 6 receptions for 111 receiving yards. So I'll just ask you, how much differently, because the last game they played was against the Ravens, which I think is so strange, but how much differently will this Week 14 matchup play out as far as fantasy is concerned for Browns players?
Well, I'm no weatherman, but I think that being at home, as long as the weather cooperates, should help the Browns in this game. I don't know. I mean, is there really more that you want me to talk about? Because I think that it was game script and these running backs coming back from injury, like with Kareem Hunt. So I do expect, I mean, you can't expect lower than what they performed. I think it's only up from here. The issue is how high is their ceiling in this matchup. And I think that, with the way that Baltimore's defense plays, they're a lot easier to pass against than they are to run against. It means, I think it opens the door for Kareem Hunt, if he's healthy enough, to have that receiving upside. And Nick Chubb is going to get his carries and may find a way into the end zone on the goal line. But it also could be Kareem Hunt. That's kind of how that backfield goes. So I feel better about Hunt than I do Chubb in this matchup, just giving his receiving upside. And I think if you have to start Jarvis Landry, I would probably lower expectations from what he did back in Week 12 because, I mean, we haven't really seen that Jarvis Landry this season outside of that.
And like Blake said, I mean, this matchup also plays to the strengths of the Browns because they're a run-heavy offense, but Baltimore ranks 1st in rushing yards allowed per game at only 84.3, but 2nd to last in passing yards allowed. So, it's not optimal for the way this offense likes to run, quite literally. But it'll be interesting to see how differently this game goes. We can move on to my last matchup. I'll lead the way on. Cowboys football team. Almost slipped up there. Divisional matchup.
Almost got canceled.
Almost got canceled. Dak Prescott in Thursday Night Football against the Saints last week. 26 for 40, 238 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, 1 interception, 3 rushes for -3 yards, 11.22 fantasy points. Do you expect Prescott to bounce back in a big way in this matchup? Because this Washington defense ranks 3rd to last in passing yards allowed per game.
Yeah, but they've been on a tear lately, man. I mean, this is the Washington defense that we were kind of hyping up preseason. So I do think that Dak Prescott gets right this week and probably doubles his score from last week. Just because, I mean, Dak Prescott's really talented. I think he's got the weapons around him. He's got the skill. He's got the talent. So I like him this week. I'm not worried about Washington, preventing him from doing what he needs to do. So I think he's going to bounce back.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna read the stats between Zeke and Pollard because this has troubled me for the past few weeks as someone who manages both of them. Zeke had 13 rushes for 45 yards, 2 catches for 2 yards. Pollard had 7 rushes, so 6 less, for 71 yards and a touchdown, all from one big play. I think it was 40-plus yards for sure. two
Yeah,
receptions for
56, I
3
want to say.
yards. Zeke hasn't played more than 70% of the Cowboys' offensive snaps in 5 straight games after topping that percentage in all but 2 of Dallas's first 7. So obviously, he's been capped. Mike McCarthy, how gracious of him, acknowledged that he'd been on a rep count the past month. So what do you do this backfield? Help me. Help me, bruv. Help me, Blake.
Well, I think you have to. I think you have to continue starting Zeke because he is getting the majority of the touches. And the other thing is that he has, and you've benefited from this directly, that Zeke has the goal line potential
Goal line
to
challenge.
pound a couple in from 3 yards out. So.
Yeah.
You got to keep rolling with Zeke. There's no scenario where I see you benching him, where I see anyone benching him.
Yeah. Well, he's
because
healthy,
he has that touchdown upside in this offense. So
Yep.
you just kind of you got to live with the fact that Pollard's getting more usage.
Yep. I do agree. CeeDee Lamb did his thing, 19.2 fantasy points. Amari Cooper was disappointing, but he was limited to just 34% of the team's offensive snaps in Week 13 because it was his first game back from his 2-week absence with COVID. Do you expect other pass catchers, excluding Lamb, so I guess Gallup and Schultz, to take a back seat once Cooper gets more reintegrated into this offense? Or how do you project them? Because Gallup, I'll just read out their stats, had 5 receptions for 36 yards and a touchdown, and Schultz had 5 receptions for 33 yards. What do you expect happens to them if Cooper gets more integrated in this offense again?
So if Cooper gets more involved, I think that probably Schultz will suffer before Gallup. Seems like Gallup has been getting really good usage in the games that he's played this season, and we, granted we haven't seen him play a lot. He hasn't been healthy for the majority of the season, but it seems like Dallas is utilizing him in a very complementary role, and so I would be more concerned about Schultz falling off versus Gallup. But that being said, Cooper's been really up and down this season, so I don't necessarily think that you kind of got to just continue to start these guys, and hope that things work out for you.
Yep, and then the football team ranks third to last in passing yards allowed per game, as said before, and third in rushing yards allowed per game. So I love that for Zeke. No, not at all. We'll move on to Washington themselves, though. Antonio Gibson. 23 carries for 88 rushing yards and 5 receptions for 23 receiving yards and a touchdown. No J.D. McKissick there last week. He had 22.1 fantasy points. He's had 20-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last past 4 games. Can Antonio Gibson be trusted again?
I think yes. I mean, he's getting the volume that you wanted from him when you drafted him, and the amount of receptions he's been getting lately is pretty promising. And I know that that has something to do with McKissick being inactive, but it's still good to see that he's getting involved in that aspect of the game. So yeah, you like him. I think this matchup isn't great, but he's going to get the volume. He's not really competing for touches in the backfield, so you feel good about that. I mean, I guess I could see a scenario where Heineke vultures one, but I think it's unlikely. I think Gibson's the guy.
Yeah, and then kind of the exact opposite of this situation, Terry McLaurin, 3 receptions for 22 yards. Dallas does rank 28th in passing yards allowed per game, but what's your confidence level in McLaurin?
I think he's been another one that's been really up and down this season, and kind of disappointing compared to how he performed last year. But that being said, I think you're starting him. I think that he's got great upside, and maybe the matchup isn't. I mean, the matchup on paper sounds good, but I think in a division game, it helps that they're at home. But yeah, I think you're starting him, and I mean, it's got to be better than 5.2.
Yeah, and his target share could be better with Logan Thomas being placed on IR with a knee injury because he had been getting some usage in his time back. His MRI revealed that he did not tear his ACL, so that's good. But he's definitely out for 3 weeks at a minimum. Ricky Seals-Jones is dealing with a injury himself, but do you think he kind of reemerges back as a reliable tight end option like he was earlier in the season when Thomas was gone?
Yeah, if he's healthy, I mean, we've kind of seen it throughout the season that the Washington tight end is a reliable, position for fantasy points. So And Seals Jones has done his part when Thomas was injured earlier in the season, so I like him as as someone to reacquire from the waivers if he's available.
Yeah, agreed. And as I said before, it's a pretty good matchup on paper. Cowboys defense ranks 27th in total yards allowed per game. So we'll just have to see in this divisional matchup. So I'll let you take over with Jaguars Titans.
All right, so let's start with probably the one that is on a lot of people's minds, and that's James Robinson. He got 8 carries for 24 yards, 1 catch for 11 yards, and 1 fumble lost on the second play of the game. He sat on the bench for 26 consecutive plays after that fumble.
Jeez.
I get the sense that Urban Meyer just doesn't like him. And we do know that Carlos Hyde is Urban Meyer's former player back in college. So I think there's a little bit of favoritism going on. When asked about Robinson's touches, Urban Meyer claimed that the running back coach is responsible for that. He doesn't play a role in that decision. So it's kind of scummy, and I think that the Urban Meyer experience probably needs to come to an end this year because Jacksonville's no better for it, and it seems like a complete mismanagement of the talent on this roster. I mean, Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones Jr., Trevor Lawrence, these are guys that, minus Trevor Lawrence, these are guys that are proven to some extent, varying degrees in the NFL. I think that...
Laviska Shenault was a breakout candidate. He was a breakout candidate at wide receiver, second-year wide receiver. Drafted him ahead of Pittman, if that tells you anything, with how he was projected before the season. And obviously that didn't turn out. So
I think a lot of this comes down on Meyer just not being ready for prime time, so to speak.
I agree.
And no matter who is getting the majority of the touches at running back, it's a tough matchup. Tennessee ranks 6th in rushing yards allowed per game. So I'll ask you, Carson, what do you do if you roster James Robinson?
I really do not like what Urban Meyer is saying about the situation, but I think that... Man, it's tough. If you're needing a win this week, Robinson, has the potential to give you that upside, but he could also completely screw you. I would be more inclined to trust Robinson, but what Urban Meyer is doing, just deflecting the blame, and he fumbled once and just got put in timeout. I trust Robinson, but I think there's other variables coming into play that factor into a decision on starting him or not.
Yeah, it's a difficult time of year to have these kind of decisions to make, and we've been saying it all throughout the show. But it's true. We're on the precipice of fantasy playoff football, and it's time to win or go home. So, I guess consider the matchups of your various running backs and include that in your decision making, but. We do know that James Robinson is capable of a lot in this offense when given the opportunities, so, your results may vary.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the Titans. A.J. Brown remains on IR with the earliest return expected to be December 23rd, which is Week 16 against the San Francisco 49ers. Julio Jones has been moved to the team's designated for return from IR list, so we should expect to see him for the first time back since Week 9. How do you rank Julio if he's active this week?
Oh, God. With no A.J. Brown, we've talked about this before. When they're both there, it kind of helps them out more. So I don't think you're like, oh, no, Brown, look at all these targets for Jones, but... And you can't really trust Tannehill with the way he's been playing. I don't think you can confidently start him. You can hope he has a good week this week, and then he's going to be valuable for you in the playoffs, but I think that's the best you can get.
So are you flexing him or are you benching him?
I'd say in most instances, with the depth people should have at the position, I think you could bench him.
Okay. Interesting. Let's talk about Nick Westbrook-Akine. 9 receptions on 14 targets for 132 yards. Right off the bat, that's like a Cooper Kupp game stat line. But that's and one touchdown in the past 2 weeks. Yeah. So, what's your confidence level in starting this player against Jacksonville?
I don't have any. I don't have any. I don't trust this. I don't trust this passing offense. We'll talk about the rushing offense a bit, but I mean the Jaguars have been. I know that they didn't do great against the Rams last week, but they've had a few matchups where they've been sneakily good against the pass, like against the Bills,
on
for
the
example.
defensive end. Yeah, I get that. I think it's telling that you're opting to bench Julio, so I don't expect you to be more confident about Westbrook.
How do you assess Julio?
I would say I would argue for flexing him. I think that I think given the matchup and the potential volume that he's going to be looking at, the issue is that if their backfield runs all over Jacksonville, then they're not going to have to throw.
Yep.
So it's risk reward. But I still kind of think that Julio has a few good games left in him, and against Jacksonville, he certainly has a chance to perform well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's risky. And then talking more about the backfield, Dontrell Hilliard, we need to monitor Jeremy McNichols' availability. I think McNichols' return will likely affect Hilliard more directly than Foreman. Would you agree?
Yeah, I like Foreman the most out of this. I mean, Hilliard's stats look phenomenal from Week 12, but you got to keep in mind that he had a huge 60-yard plus run, and Foreman kind of just consistently had a well-rounded 100-plus rushing yard game. So I trust that a little bit more than Hilliard's performance.
Yeah, so if you have either one of these guys, assuming that McNichols does not play, you're ranking Foreman ahead of Hilliard. Are you starting both? Are you starting just Foreman? How do you manage that?
I think you could get away with starting Foreman and Hilliard. I think you could. I would prefer Foreman, as said before, but I do like the matchup. I like it more for the rushers, and I do think the game script you talk about with just the backfield taking over, playing like Derrick Henry's there amongst the two of them, I think that is a realistic outcome.
Yeah, that's the concern. So start Titans receivers with the risk in mind that it may be a running day for Tennessee, like most weeks. All right, let's talk about Giants at the Chargers. There's a lot of news surrounding this game, and it's just kind of popped up all out of a sudden, and we'll get to that in a moment. But let's talk about all of the injuries to monitor heading into the weekend.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's a long list. So to start with the did not practice on Wednesday, we've got Mike Glennon, who is still yet to clear the concussion protocol, although it has been stated if he does, Glennon will start. And that's kind of piggybacking off the fact that Daniel Jones had a limited practice on Wednesday, but he has not been cleared for contact. So he's not in a position to swoop in and take the starting job this week. It's going to be Glennon if he clears the concussion protocol. I have no idea what they're going to do if Glennon doesn't clear. So
oh my God.
Maybe they'll just have Saquon run Wildcat. Who knows? And that would probably be good for his fantasy prospects. But back on the did not practice list, Kenny Golladay with a rib injury and Kadarius Toney with an oblique injury.
What does that
mean?
Again,
these are things to monitor. You know about the obliques.
No.
Listen, we don't have time to give an anatomy lesson here. Let's move on. For limited participants, we have Saquon Barkley with an ankle. You don't like to see that, and Sterling Shepard with a quad injury. These are things to monitor. It's tough, man. Let's get right into Saquon. 11 carries for 55 yards, 6 catches, which you like, but for only 19 yards, it gets you 13.4 fantasy points. And stop me if I'm wrong, but at this point, he's matchup dependent for me. He is no longer a must start.
Yeah, I can't stop you, unfortunately, and I hate to say it.
I mean, ignoring the game where he left due to injury in Week 5, he has scored fewer than 13.5 fantasy points in every game that he didn't also score a touchdown. Yeah. So in Weeks 3 and 4, he scored at least one touchdown. He finished those weeks with 21.4 and 29.6 fantasy points respectively. But he's been a single-digit scorer in 3 of 7 games played, and that's, again, ignoring the Week 5 game. So he's just not in a position that you feel confident. And the matchup's good, but like we said earlier, if the Chargers get off to a big lead quick, like they did against the Bengals, Barkley's going to need to rely on his pass catching to remain fantasy relevant. And so I'll ask you, what's your confidence level in starting Barkley?
I think that with where you drafted him and how shallow running back can be, I think you almost have to start him. I don't see many lineups that have surefire running back options ahead of him. I mean, I'm sure they exist, so I don't think that you should force yourself to start Barkley just because he's Saquon. But
yeah, I mean, there have been waiver acquisitions throughout the season that you probably feel better. Like if you have an Eli Mitchell or
him or Patterson.
Right, or a Patterson or even Alexander Madison, you feel better about all those guys ahead of Barkley.
100%.
Even given the matchup. So
look at Saquon's stats and not his name when you make your decision.
Yeah, exactly. So I get it if you have to start him. You may not have better options, but I think it's time that we face the facts that he is no longer a must-start because his name is Saquon Barkley or because you drafted him in the first couple rounds. Like, this is just not the player that we saw previous seasons.
Nope, it's not. I mean, this offense isn't helping him, but it's not either.
Yeah, all right, let's talk about the Chargers who just, I mean, my goodness, like, popping up left and right, COVID list. Yeah. So Keenan Allen has been placed on the reserve COVID-19 list. He is vaccinated and therefore can still play if he tests negative twice, 24 hours apart. Mike Williams was deemed a close contact of Allen, and that means that he still has potential to play. Must quarantine 5 days from Monday, where this was initially reported. And if neither of these guys end up playing, I mean, Jalen Guyton, 4 catches for 90 yards and a touchdown. He finished with 18.9 fantasy points last week. I mean, he was rostered in 0.2% of leagues at the time of making these notes. So, worthy of a waiver wire pickup at this point, given all the news?
Yeah, given all the news, I wasn't going to trust it if Allen and Williams are still in the picture, but given all these news, I think picking it up now would be smart, and then I think that you got to trust that. If one of them's out, I think he could be a solid flex, and if both of them are out, I think it's crazy to say, I think he's a must-start. I don't know, that's bold.
No, that is bold because it's much more difficult for a wide receiver to step into a big role versus a running back.
It's just he's coming off of a big game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is a guy that I hadn't really even heard of before last week. But he's in a position now where he can benefit off of one of these guys missing, and if both of them miss, then I think it's going to be a heavy Austin Eckler day. But yeah, something to monitor heading into the weekend. We'll have more information on that hopefully by Saturday.
Agreed.
Yeah, let's talk about the next matchup where the Detroit Lions 1-10-1 up against your Denver Broncos. I wish I had more positive things to say, but we've just learned as of this week that the Lions have a minor flu outbreak. So No good luck moving forward for them, it seems. Jared Goff was among 9 players to miss practice on Wednesday, with 6 of them being out due to the illness. So, I mean, assuming, I don't know, if they can gather all their pieces together by Sunday, and can they keep the momentum rolling and get another win at Denver? It's a tough matchup.
No. I mean, Denver's defense is much stronger than the Vikings, and
absolutely.
Even though fantasy-wise, pass catchers have been a nightmare for the Broncos, they got, and you'll talk about this in a second, Javonte Williams went crazy against the Chiefs, and then Melvin Gordon, that's a really, really good 1-2 punch backfield.
Yeah, one of the best in the league, I would argue.
Yeah, which detracts from each other fantasy-wise, but as far as NFL is concerned, it is great.
Yeah, so just before we move on to the Broncos, I want to say Amon-Ra St. Brown, former USC player, 10 catches, 86 yards, and a touchdown for 24.8 fantasy points. Is he worthy of a waiver wire pickup?
I mean, I'd love to say yes. Kind of a USC fan. We got that in us a little bit. But he's had games where he's had I don't even think this is his first double-digit targeted game. So, and then he just kind of erases from, you know,
He
he
disappears.
disappears. He completely
Yeah.
disappears. So I want to see what happens against the Broncos because they are a much stronger defense than the Lions or the Vikings. Sorry.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I mean, and we're in a position now where taking flyers is not really your most advised course of action.
Yeah.
He's rostered in 6.5% of leagues as of making these notes, but just keep in mind that he can disappear on you. So I kind of agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Broncos now. Javonte Williams, 23 carries, 102 yards, 6 catches for 76 and a touchdown. Finished just shy of 30 fantasy points. If nothing else, because it looks like Gordon is in a position to be active for this game and eat into his role yet again. But from an NFL perspective, it's very promising to see that they seem to have a very talented rookie on their hands.
Yeah, I mean, I would say outside of, I was kind of looking this up to make this comparison. Outside of Najee, he might be the best rookie quarterback in the NFL right now. I mean, no, Elijah Mitchell exists.
You said quarterback, but you meant running
I
back.
meant running back. But he's up there. He's near the top of that list. Ramondre Stevenson's had moments too. But I love his potential. He looks great.
Yeah, I will say this though, it's concerning for his career if Denver doesn't figure out their quarterback situation.
Yes. They got time though. He's young.
They do, yeah. He's very young, so it's a great option for dynasty leagues and redraft leagues. Melvin Gordon is a free agent this offseason, so he may be moving on elsewhere. If that is the case, you feel very good about Javonte Williams in redraft leagues. So something to keep in mind, and this is a great matchup for both running backs. Detroit ranks 28th in rushing yards allowed per game, 29th in total yards allowed per game, and 27th in points allowed. So all around good opportunities for this backfield. And then I'll ask you quickly, I know we just talked about the defensive rankings, but are you dropping Cortland Sutton after this week if he doesn't get it done?
Yeah, this is his last chance. For me.
I think that's completely fair. Completely fair. He's been a single-digit fantasy scorer in 5 straight games, and it hasn't even been high single digits.
No,
it hasn't even been high single digits. It's been 6 points or fewer in 5 straight games.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think he's droppable after this week if he does not get it done.
Yeah.
And let's visualize that. So what is getting it done for you with Cortland Sutton this week?
Double digits.
Really? Are you going to be satisfied with 10 points from him?
Yes.
Okay.
Enough to stay on my roster.
Okay. I think that's a low bar for him to achieve in this matchup. So, I think you're letting him off easy, but maybe that's the fan in you.
Yeah, maybe it is.
All right, let's talk about Niners Bengals. Kyle Shanahan was asked about Deebo Samuel's availability for Week 14. He said, "Still too early to tell." It is important to note Deebo did not practice on Wednesday, so we're gonna have to monitor that heading into the weekend. Brandon Ayuk. We were talking him up, saying, "Hey, no Deebo. Maybe this is a chance for Ayuk to step into a bigger role and kind of, perform up to the expectations we had for him in preseason." He did not really do that. 3 catches for 55 yards.
Kittle said, "I'll take that."
He certainly did, and then more, and then more. So yeah, Cincinnati ranks 27th in passing yards allowed per game. It is an opportunity for Ayuk to bounce back. But the star of the show was George Kittle. 9 catches, 181 yards for 2 touchdowns, even had a rush for 5 yards. So, obviously you're starting Kittle. It's a great matchup. I certainly don't expect anything remotely close to what he did last week. But you're starting to feel better about George Kittle being George Kittle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he's looking like George Kittle.
Yeah, so... And then lastly, Eli Mitchell, he is in the concussion protocol, did not practice on Wednesday. But as we've seen time and time again, that the 49ers running back is a very valuable position, fantasy-wise. They get good volume. It's good to see Eli Mitchell getting a little bit more involved in the passing game recently. The trouble is that Cincinnati ranks fourth in rushing yards allowed and eighth in points allowed, so not the best matchup, despite or regardless of who starts at running back.
Yeah.
All right, and then for the Bengals, Joe Burrow, finger and a knee injury, did not practice on Wednesday. Joe Mixon, he was disappointing, but it came back to what we were saying before, where the Chargers just got off to a hot start, and that really limited the amount that they could lean on Mixon in that game. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I was really hoping that I thought this was going to be a great matchup for him, just with how the Chargers defense is. But I was really hoping the Bengals wouldn't have gotten the ball first. Pretty sure they didn't.
Yeah,
they didn't score first.
No, that could have been the difference in his day.
It could have been. It really could have been. Him getting, I mean, he still ended up with a touchdown, but him getting an early touchdown too, that would have made a huge difference.
Yeah, with a fumble, he finished with 9.4 fantasy points. Hurt his neck towards the end of that game, so we'll need to monitor that heading into the weekend as well. And just on that same note, Samaje Perine, he's rostered in 6.6% of leagues as of making these notes. He's the clear next man up. We've seen him in a proven role in games where Mixon has missed. He should be rostered more. And then on to the pass catchers. San Francisco ranks 4th in passing yards allowed per game and 6th in total yards allowed. So not a great matchup. T. Higgins has been a strong wide receiver 1 in back-to-back weeks. Last week getting you 9 catches for 138 yards and a touchdown. He missed practice Wednesday with an ankle injury. So that concerns you a little bit. And then Jamar Chase, a lot more underwhelming since the Week 10 bye.
I'm sure you saw it, but that deep touchdown potential play that he just bobbled and then it led to a pick.
Yeah, looking like preseason Chase.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, that sums up kind of how his season has transitioned from wide receiver 3 to inconsistency.
Yeah, so I'll ask you, given that both are under the assumption that both are healthy, who would you rather have between Higgins and Chase at this point? Or I guess we'll say rest of season.
I guess Higgins.
Is that recency bias, or do you believe in something that you've been seeing? I guess that's kind of the same question asked twice.
Yeah, I mean, this is not... Higgins had performances, I don't know to this degree, but he had great performances last season too. And Chase has really, really stepped down in the past 5 weeks. So I'm not talking about, a game or two that Chase has not done well. He's bounced between 10 and 7, 10 and 7. He's been very underwhelming for someone that seemed like a lock offensive rookie of the year to now taking
but now it's probably more Jalen Waddle.
Yeah.
I think he's starting to emerge as the offensive rookie of the year. But I'll say this: the remaining of their schedule at Denver in Week 15. Versus Baltimore in Week 16, versus Kansas City in Week 17, and at Cleveland in Week 18. You feel good about those two in the middle. You feel less good about those two on the outside.
Yeah, and the two in the middle are also at home.
Yeah,
I agree.
All right, well.
I think you're starting both of them, though. So.
No, yeah, you're not, for sure. And it's a tough matchup, so lower expectations, especially on Higgins' behalf.
Yeah. All right, here we
go. All right,
go.
let's talk about, Bills and Buccaneers. I'm just going to start with this, and it's not where you think I'm going. Regarding the Bills' performance on Monday Night Football, you just need to disregard it, because the weather, if you watched any of that game, I mean, they were experiencing upwards of 50-mile-an-hour winds. And that's an environment that is not conducive for passing the ball. But that being said, big win for the Patriots. I'm thrilled that how they're performing this season. I'm loving how they're being coached up, and it's great to see. So now that I got that out of the way, Carson, do you have any doubts among these pass catchers for this week?
Yeah, we've talked about Knox, Sanders, and Beasley in past weeks. Kind of them being mediocre as Diggs has kind of taken a step forward. Diggs didn't do horrible, but given the game, I was kind of lucky for him to get 9.1 with the way that game played out. But yeah, I don't think that you can be confident in anyone besides Diggs. You can hope that Knox gets some touchdown looks. and that's really all you can ask for. I mean, Sanders and Beasley, I don't think are startable until they get back in form like they were earlier in the season.
Okay, I think that I don't disagree with you entirely. I think Dawson Knox is still startable, and obviously you're starting Diggs. But yeah, I think you need to wait and see on Beasley and Sanders because those guys are just not performing up to what we've seen earlier in the season.
Yep.
Let's move on to the Buccaneers, and I'm just gonna give you a couple over under here. So over under questions. Buffalo ranks first in passing yards allowed per game at 165.3 and total yards allowed per game at 272.3. So you taking the over or the under for Tampa Bay on both of those stats?
Over on both. I mean, Brady looked like prime Brady in week 13, other than that weird pick six that he did on a little dump-off pass. He looked phenomenal.
Yeah, he did.
20 passing attempts in the first quarter. He was on pace for 80.
Yeah, he was. He's slinging that thing, baby, and I love to see it.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our next question, our next over-under. Buffalo ranks second in points allowed per game at 16.3. You taking the over or the under for Tampa Bay?
Over again. Over.
I agree with that. I think it's going to be a competitive game. I think there's going to be a lot of scoring. So from the fantasy perspective of that, I think you like pretty much all players in this game.
And it's in Tampa Bay.
One more thing. Yeah,
I was just gonna say,
exactly.
You're not really that worried about the weather.
No, of course not. And then I would just say one more thing to note. We saw New England run the ball 45 times, and the whole reason they were able to get away with that is because they were running all over the Bills. So I think it could be a big day for Leonard Fournette if they need to rely on him at all.
Yep, I agree.
All right, let's talk about our first primetime matchup, Sunday Night Football, Bears-Packers. Kind of a meh matchup, considering how the Bears have been playing. But we'll get to see Justin Fields back at starting quarterback, especially with Andy Dalton in his turnover-filled day last week. I think that's a welcome change, although Justin Fields kind of hasn't really proven himself too much as a passer. That being said, I'll kind of go off script here for a moment. What does that make you feel about the Bears pass catchers with Justin Fields returning?
I mean, not great. Back to not great. I mean, Mooney should have had a good week last week, and he really didn't. So I don't think you can be any more confident than that. Kind of lost trust in that outlook for him and what should have been a favorable outcome with how he'd been doing and Robinson being out. But, I mean, you'll go into David Montgomery. Seems like he is the focal point of this offense.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off what you said that I think with Justin Fields missing some time that he's probably going to take a few steps back, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And kind of delay his emergence in this offense. So. Yeah, I would say lower expectations for the pass catchers. And then, that being said, Green Bay ranks top nine in all defensive categories. Most importantly, fifth in points allowed per game. So, certainly not a good matchup in any sense of the word. David Montgomery did not practice on Wednesday, but he came off of a very heavily used game. He got 29 touches total, including 8 catches for 51 yards. So, he's coming off of a season-high receiving game. If he is healthy and able to play, Chicago's going to need to rely on that against this tough Green Bay defense. And then, on the same note, if Khalil Herbert is available in your league, and he likely is, because as of making these notes, he was rostered in 19.8% of leagues, this guy should be rostered more. We've seen him be a reliable insurance policy when Montgomery missed time, so add him to your roster. Look for him on your waiver and pick him up because there's a possibility that David Montgomery misses this game. It's not the best matchup, but it's just important that these handcuffs are rostered in your league.
Agreed.
All right, let's talk about the Packers. Matt LaFleur calls the backfield a 1A and 1B situation.
God.
This does not inspire confidence for those who manage Aaron Jones.
No, not at all. I think at one point this season he was like ranked as a top 5 running back rest of the season, and that just shows you how quick this situation tanked for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Chicago ranks 23rd in rushing yards allowed per game. I think you just have to expect a running back by committee until we see otherwise, because in the games where Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon have both been healthy, Dillon has been outpacing him in carries, and that's
Like
concerning.
Zeke and Pollard. It's like Zeke and Pollard.
But it's
some
actually
degree.
the inverse. It's the inverse because
Yeah.
Pollard is getting fewer carries. Jones is getting fewer carries here, and he's arguably, he's clearly the guy ahead in terms of ADP at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, something to monitor. But yeah, you got to expect a committee until we see something change. And based on how the coach feels, I don't expect that change to be coming anytime soon.
Yeah. Agreed.
Lastly, on this, any pass catchers that you like besides Devontae Adams? The ones that come to mind are Randall Cobb and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. These guys are both rostered in fewer than 15% of leagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're worth adding. Randall Cobb has been a little bit more TD dependent. Marquez Valdez-Scantling's looked a little bit more just overall well integrated in this offense in the past 2 weeks or so. I definitely think that they have the potential to be worth starting later on in the season, so they're worth maybe grabbing right now as you head into the playoffs. But I mean, I'm not running out to start them right now, but yeah, I think they should be rostered in more leagues than that. That's very, very low.
Okay, so some good prospects there. I like to see that heading into the playoffs. All right, let's talk about the final matchup. This should be a great game. I anticipate watching this game. It is a NFC West matchup of the top 2 teams, Rams at the Cardinals. Let's jump right into it. Arizona ranks 4th in passing yards allowed per game and points allowed per game, and 5th in total yards allowed. So it's going to be tough for the Rams to upset the Cardinals. We pretty much most recently, who was the Cardinals' most recent loss to?
Panthers?
It was a game where
Packers.
Kyler missed. No, that was their first loss.
I think it was Panthers.
You might be right on that.
I can check.
Yeah, check on that while I rant about Darrell Henderson. Let me take a drink first.
Yeah, get some popcorn, everybody. And yes, it was the Panthers.
Okay, good call on you.
Week 10.
All right, let me start with this. Darrell Henderson was reported that he was expected to play, even if not getting a full workload. That's totally fine. The guy hadn't practiced all week. 3 separate reports indicating that he was going to be active. How many snaps did he get against Jacksonville? A great matchup?
I think 0.
Yeah, the same number that you and I had. So let me just say this. If we're gonna have reporting on player injuries, where is the clarity? Because in the past we've had reports where what's his face? I'm drawing a blank. So Tua Tagovailoa. He is active only in the emergency scenario where he can fill in for the quarterback. So maybe that's the report that should have been made around Darrell Henderson. Not that he is expected to play even if not getting a full workload. I need another drink.
This is all because he had Michelle on his bench, too.
I did, but here's what I'm saying. I did everything right. I rostered the backup. I watched for the reports. And you know what Sean McVay tells me? Pound sand. We don't need him. So it's just frustrating. Not that it made the difference in the outcome of my matchup, but I guarantee you it was the determining factor in outcomes in other leagues.
Yes.
I can guarantee it. There's no possible way that I was the only guy who took all the information presented and made the wrong choice, and I'm doing air quotes there.
Yeah.
I mean, I was misled, and I think a lot of people were misled, and it's just frustrating because we've seen a precedent set where the reporting is more clear. I mean, truthfully. So that's all I need to say on that. Sony Michel, he had a great game, 21.9 fantasy points, like we talked about. He is not rostered in 100% of leagues at the time of these notes. 60.7% rostered. This number needs to be higher. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a good matchup, but it just shows that backup running backs, when given the workload, they have value. So, yeah. And then Odell Beckham Jr., I'll talk about him for a moment. 2 catches for 28 yards and a touchdown, finished with 10.8 fantasy points. This is a much different storyline if he doesn't catch a touchdown. Would you agree?
Yeah, completely. I liked seeing it, honestly, because I kind of have a similar feeling towards Odell that I had with Cam Newton. But, yeah, that touchdown definitely did save his fantasy day, and it still wasn't magnificent.
Yeah, I mean, he's a touchdown-dependent flex with upside. I still feel better about Van Jefferson, who had a better statistical day. 6 catches, 41 yards, and a touchdown. At this point, and we talked about it last week, that maybe there's a point where OBJ works his way into the number 2 receiving option. No one's going to surpass Cooper Kupp, but yeah, at this point, I still feel better about starting Van Jefferson ahead of OBJ.
Yay. I have Van Jefferson. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. And then let's talk about the Cardinals for a moment before we wrap this up. Kyler Murray had 11 completions on 15 pass attempts for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then the biggest part of his day, arguably, was 10 carries for 59 yards and an additional 2 touchdowns. So he finished with 30.82 fantasy points. It's good to see Kyler with a season-high rushing performance coming off of injury. I'm not concerned by the low number of pass attempts in this game. The weather was bad. And like I said, Andy Dalton was turning the ball over repeatedly, giving Arizona good field position on multiple drives. So it's a game script thing. I'm not like, is Kyler not throwing enough? Like I think it's all game script related, and so I'm not concerned about that. And I will ask you, any major takeaways from the pass catchers? I mean, there wasn't a lot to see in this game.
I mean, it was interesting because with the game script going as it did, and this is the first game in 5 or 6 weeks that Murray and Hopkins have both been out there. It's kind of hard to say what this does for the other pass catchers, but I do think that you kind of have to disregard this game to some degree, kind of like you're doing with the Bills.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the takeaway here is that Hopkins got the touchdown, or got a touchdown. He's had 8 touchdowns in 8 full games played. Week 8 against Green Bay was the game that Hopkins missed the majority of with a hamstring injury that kept him out weeks 9 through 11. So, I mean, it's really difficult to say that he's... I mean, it's very unlikely that he's going to maintain that pace for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Because that's just... I mean, the amount of touchdowns that he's scoring relative to the amount of games he's playing, it's unsustainable. So... it's concerning. I traded him away several weeks ago because of that reason, and I think for most leagues the trade deadline is passed. You got to roll with him at this point if you have him, but just keep that in mind. He's been touchdown dependent this year, and that's something that you need to keep in mind when you're assessing your roster decisions moving forward.
Yeah, look at stats, not the name, just like Saquon.
Right. And then lastly, I'll ask you who you got in this one.
I'm gonna go with Cardinals. I think this is gonna be a very exciting matchup. We thought that about Bills and Patriots, but that was ruined by the weather. I think the Cardinals Stadium's indoors, and it's
not
also
ruined by
Arizona.
the outcome though.
Yeah, for you. Still a boring game to watch, but I think the Cardinals. I don't know. I'll say I just like the Cardinals more. I think I used to kind of like the Rams, but I think what Robert Woods has done to me this season has left a really sour taste in my mouth with the Rams, and what Kyler has done for me has made me really like the Cardinals. And I like seeing Kyler being successful. I like him. I like seeing him lead this team in this way. So yeah, I'll go with Cardinals. I mean, they have... These are just two amazing offenses and amazing defenses. So probably adds up to a mediocre matchup because that's how it ends up being. But hey, it could be a high scoring, exciting game, but it just seems like a lot of these games that we say are going to be the games to watch end up being like the very slow win at any cost, like the Patriots would do. But I don't know. I don't see that with these two offenses. Bill just gets it done.
Difficult. I think it's difficult to see that outcome happening in this matchup.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I'll give Cardinals the edge, being at home and having all their players back healthy, minus Chase Edmonds. So,
I mean, they're 10-2 with Kyler and Hopkins being out for like 5 weeks.
Yeah, they've been getting it done.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you all so much for listening. We will be speaking again soon for Saturday news and DFS, so tune in for that. And that's about it.
Peace out, everybody.